General, thank you again. You are credited with stabilizing Iraq during the Iraq troop surge, which is now viewed as a success, but at the time was considered highly controversial. At the time, just as a reminder, President Bush ordered 20,000 more troops into Iraq and extended the tour of most troops in the country. But Democrats had just taken control of Congress. They called the election a referendum on Iraq. 2/3 of the American public opposed further involvement, and Democrats running for president were unified in opposition. So in that highly charged environment, what was it like being the man charged with leading the task and getting such amazing results?
It was like carrying the world's heaviest rucksack. I didn't choose to be the face of the surge. It was sort of thrust upon me. And you realize the importance, the magnitude of this, it's the all-in moment and so forth. And you've got to produce. And I was very, very fortunate to have an extraordinary team, immediate team, the team of teams, 165,000 great American young men and women when the full buildup was done. But there was enormous pressure. You could feel it. I truly believed that the change in strategy that we implemented would produce what ultimately was very, very dramatic in terms of results. I mean, a reduction of violence by some 90% over the course of the 19 and a half months, at least, that I was privileged to command. But what I didn't know is if we'd be able to turn the tide, to get the violence going down sufficiently before we had to go back to Congress. I took command in early February of 2007. We knew we had to go back to Congress in mid-September. It ultimately was on 11 September of all dates. And the violence got worse and worse. And I'd predicted this in the confirmation hearing, which was a very emotionally charged event itself. And we knew that this hearing was going to be really quite something. It really was in the end, but thankfully, 11 weeks prior, the tide turned and violence went down very, very significantly during that time, and we had real results to report. I cautioned, I said, the progress is significant, but it's fragile and reversible. But, there was, again, it's a feeling of a pretty heavy rucksack. Again, but as always, you've got lots and lots of great people, again, including those who wear our country's uniform to help carry that rucksack, and I had the best of diplomatic partners, I think, and certainly in recent history, in Ambassador Ryan Crocker.
Finally, we've covered just a few of your many, many victories. You've had victories in government, in academia, in the business world. There's been some adversity as well, including,
Sure,
as you've acknowledged, some of your own doing. What advice would you give to other leaders to help them keep hanging in there through the tough times?
Well, I think the truth is that probably when leaders most emerge as leaders is actually when they are in a moment of adversity. A friend of mine, and actually, by the way, that's when you find out who the great members of your team, your friends, your family, and so forth and so on. And in fact, one of those great friends wrote me and sent a quote that he took from someone, and it said, "Don't tell me how high the man jumped. Tell me how high he jumped back after he got knocked down." Now, I'm not recommending that you go out and get knocked down or knock yourself down, but at the end of the day, it is not about the high five moments or the successes or spiking the ball after great stuff. That's easy. In fact, actually, you need to temper that a tiny bit. But I mean, that's not hard. It's hard getting there. What's really hard, obviously, is when the going is really tough, on days of extraordinary casualties or setbacks, or market bombing of 150 great Iraqi civilians blown up, the holy shrine blown up by the extremists, the Parliament building attacked, the bridge dropped in the center of the Tigris River that connects East and West Baghdad. That's when you see who can hang tough, and it really is the measure, and that's where you've got to have that inner strength. That's where you got to have the recognition that you've got to continue to drive on. What you're doing professionally or personally matters a whole heck of a lot. And look, I was unbelievably privileged to be engaged in missions that, as we say, are larger than self. But most of all, to be engaged in those missions with other great Americans in the military, the intelligence community, the diplomatic world, and now, frankly, in business. And folks that, have, in many cases, sacrificed a great deal. I was privileged to do the largest re-enlistment ceremony in our history. 1,215 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, men and women, in one of the huge palaces that Saddam had that we took over on the 4th of July, 2008. And I was the re-enlistment officer, and we were reciting the oath. They were repeating it after me, and I looked out at them and said, what is this all about? I mean, we're in combat. And they know that by doing this, that they're likely going to come back to combat. At that time, the economy was still roaring. It was only shortly after that. But at that time, near full employment, great opportunities for them back home. It wasn't for the stock options. And so, you look out and you ask, what is it that is producing this? And you realize that they feel privileged to do something that really matters to our country. They know that those back home appreciate what they're doing, even if those back home might disagree on the policy that we're executing. And they desperately don't want to let down those on their left and right, and they feel very privileged, again, to do these missions with them. And I mean, that was just such a wonderful event, and frankly, a wonderful professional experience. And that's what keeps you going, is looking out at that, thinking about what they have done and what they're going to do, and the sacrifices that have been made, and you just pick up that rucksack and drive on further and faster.
General, thank you for your remarks and for your lifetime of service to this country.
Thank you very much.